Capricorn, July 2026. Starts with a powerful shift. 7 signs. Your path is changing. The most profound changes rarely arrive with applause. They don't announce themselves with flashing lights or dramatic moments that everyone can see. Instead, they begin quietly. A conversation that lingers in your mind long after it ends. A strange sense that something familiar no longer feels the same. A morning when you wake up and can't quite explain why your perspective has shifted, even though nothing around you appears different. Many people describe life's biggest turning points this way. Looking back, they realize the transformation didn't begin on the day everything changed. It began weeks earlier, sometimes months. The clues were always there. They were simply too subtle to recognize in the moment. For many Capricorns, July 2026 can feel like one of those symbolic moments. A chance to pause, reflect, and notice patterns that may have been quietly unfolding beneath the surface. Not because the stars are deciding your future, but because symbolic traditions like astrology sometimes offer language for experiences that are otherwise difficult to describe. Perhaps you've been questioning old goals. Perhaps you've been feeling unusually reflective. Or perhaps there's simply a quiet feeling that life is preparing for another chapter. If any of that resonates, this journey is an invitation, not to predict your future, but to observe your own story with fresh eyes. Tonight, we're exploring 7 symbolic signs that many Capricorns may notice as July begins. Some are emotional, some are psychological, some are so subtle they're easy to dismiss. Yet together, they can paint an intriguing picture of personal growth. Let's explore the 7 signs. Sign 1. The old version of success no longer feels complete. Imagine climbing a mountain you've spent years preparing for. Every step required discipline, sacrifice, patience. You finally reach the summit. Yet instead of celebration, there's silence. Not disappointment, just an unexpected question. Now what? Many Capricorns are known for persistence, setting goals, building stability, taking responsibility. Those qualities can become extraordinary strengths, but sometimes the very goals that once inspired us eventually outgrow their purpose. Some people describe reaching milestones they dreamed about years earlier, only to discover they no longer bring the same sense of fulfillment. The promotion arrives, the savings account grows, the schedule becomes organized, yet somewhere inside, another voice begins asking deeper questions. What kind of life am I actually creating? This isn't failure, it can be a sign of emotional evolution. Psychologists often describe this as shifting from external achievement toward internal meaning. Success begins looking different, not because ambition disappears, because purpose expands. You might find yourself caring less about impressing others and more about feeling aligned with your own values. Picture an old lighthouse standing along a rugged coastline. For decades, it guided ships safely home. Its purpose never changed, but the storms around it constantly did. Perhaps your own definition of success is becoming more like that lighthouse, less about proving something, more about becoming someone. If this resonates with your experience, consider asking yourself, what goals still belong to me? And which ones belong to expectations I've been carrying for years? Sometimes the most courageous decision isn't climbing another mountain, it's choosing a different one. And that realization quietly prepares the ground for everything that follows. But the next sign is where many Capricorns begin noticing something unexpected. Sign 2. You're becoming more protective of your energy than your time. For years, people often measured productivity by calendars. Busy schedules meant progress. Full days meant success. But eventually, something begins changing. Instead of asking, "Do I have enough time?" you begin asking, "Do I have enough energy?" The difference is enormous. Imagine carrying a lantern through a dark forest. Time determines how long you can walk. Energy determines whether the lantern stays lit. Many people discover that emotional exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from carrying too much that no longer belongs to them. The conversation that drains you. The obligation you accepted out of guilt. The habit of saying yes when your heart quietly whispers no. Some Capricorns may notice that July becomes a symbolic reminder to protect their inner resources with greater intention, not by withdrawing from life, but by becoming more selective about what deserves their attention. Think about a gardener. Healthy gardens aren't created by watering everything equally. They flourish because the gardener knows which plants need care and which weeds need to be removed. The same can be true emotionally. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. It can become an act of wisdom. You might even notice subtle changes. Perhaps you leave social situations earlier than you used to. Perhaps silence begins feeling comforting instead of awkward. Perhaps you stop explaining every decision to everyone around you. These moments may seem small, yet together, they often reflect growing emotional confidence. One woman once described realizing she had spent years managing everyone else's expectations while quietly ignoring her own. Nothing dramatic happened, no major argument, no sudden life event. She simply woke up one morning and realized she wanted her days to feel lighter. That realization changed countless decisions afterward. If this connects with your own experience, ask yourself, what consistently restores my energy and what quietly depletes it? There may not be one perfect answer, but simply noticing the pattern can become the beginning of meaningful change, because transformation rarely starts with dramatic action. More often, it begins with quiet awareness, and the next sign often appears so quietly that people overlook it completely. Sign 3. You feel drawn towards solitude, not out of loneliness, but clarity. There are seasons in life when noise feels comforting. A busy schedule, constant conversations, notifications that never stop, plans filling every empty space on the calendar. And then, almost without warning, another season begins. The same noise that once felt energizing starts to feel overwhelming. Many Capricorns may notice that July invites moments of quiet, not because they're withdrawing from life, but because they're beginning to hear themselves more clearly. Some people describe this shift as unexpected. Instead of rushing to fill every free evening, they find themselves taking a walk without headphones, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee, driving without turning on the radio. The silence doesn't feel empty, it feels meaningful. Imagine standing beside a still mountain lake just before dawn. The water is so calm that it reflects the sky perfectly. Now imagine throwing handfuls of stones into that lake every few seconds. The reflection disappears. Our minds often work the same way. When life is constantly disturbed by distraction, it becomes difficult to recognize what we're truly thinking or feeling. Solitude can become the space where those ripples finally settle. This isn't about isolating yourself from people who matter. It's about creating enough quiet to reconnect with the person you've been becoming. If this resonates with your experience, you might ask yourself, when was the last time I spent time alone? Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The answer isn't a measure of success or failure. It's simply an invitation to notice, because clarity rarely shouts, it whispers. Some of history's greatest ideas weren't born in crowded rooms. They emerged during long walks, moments of reflection, hours of uninterrupted thought. Perhaps your own next chapter is asking for that same kind of space. But this is where the story begins to change, because once your inner voice grows clearer, another shift often follows, one that's impossible to ignore. Sign 4. Certain relationships begin revealing their true shape. Relationships don't usually change overnight. More often, they change one conversation at a time, one unreturned message, one unexpected act of kindness, one moment when someone truly listens or doesn't. Many Capricorns may find themselves looking at familiar relationships through a different lens as July begins, not because the people around them have suddenly changed, but because their own perspective has. Imagine walking through an art gallery you've visited dozens of times. Every painting hangs in the same place. The lighting hasn't changed. The walls haven't moved. Yet somehow, one particular painting catches your attention in a way it never did before. The artwork stayed the same. You changed. Relationships can unfold in much the same way. Someone who once seemed inspiring may now leave you feeling emotionally drained. Someone you underestimated may quietly become one of your greatest sources of encouragement. These realizations aren't invitations to judge people harshly. They're opportunities to notice which connections help you grow and which ones keep pulling you back into old versions of yourself. Psychologists often talk about emotional reciprocity. Healthy relationships aren't perfectly balanced every single day, but over time, they tend to involve mutual respect, genuine curiosity, and a willingness to support one another. When those qualities are consistently missing, many people begin to feel it long before they fully understand it. You might notice that your conversations are changing. Instead of discussing only responsibilities and obligations, you become more interested in authenticity. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" you begin asking, "What feels true to me?" That subtle shift can transform every relationship in your life. Consider the image of a forest after years of steady growth. Some trees stand tall because their roots reach deep into healthy soil. Others begin to weaken, not because anyone intended harm, but because they were never firmly rooted to begin with. Relationships are much the same. Time alone doesn't make them strong. Honesty does. Trust does. Shared growth does. If this resonates with your experience, take a quiet moment to reflect. Who leaves me feeling more like myself after we've spent time together? And equally important, where do I feel like I have to become someone else just to belong? Those questions aren't meant to create distance. They're meant to create awareness, because awareness is often the first step toward healthier boundaries, deeper conversations, and more meaningful connections. Some people discover that the strongest relationships aren't necessarily the oldest ones. They're the ones where both people continue growing without asking the other to stay the same. And as these relationships become clearer, something remarkable often begins happening inside. Not outside, inside. The next sign doesn't usually arrive through circumstances. It begins with a quiet change in the way you speak to yourself, and that may be one of the most powerful shifts of all. Sign 5. Your inner dialogue begins to sound different. There are conversations that happen every day, even when no one else is around. They don't take place across a table. They don't appear in a text message. They happen quietly, inside your own mind. For many people, that inner voice becomes so familiar that they stop noticing it altogether. It comments on every decision, questions every mistake, replays old memories, predicts outcomes before they've even had a chance to unfold. And sometimes, without realizing it, we begin believing that voice is the only truth. But many Capricorns may notice something subtle as July unfolds. The inner dialogue starts to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to catch your attention. Instead of immediately thinking, "I'm not ready," you might hear yourself wondering, "What if I'm more prepared than I realize?" Instead of saying, "I've always been this way," you may begin asking, "Is that still true?" These are small shifts in language, yet language shapes perception, and perception often shapes action. Imagine standing in a room with a single window that's been covered by heavy curtains for years. The room isn't dark because the sun disappeared. It's dark because the light hasn't been invited in. Pull the curtains back even a few inches, and suddenly the entire room begins to feel different. The room hasn't changed. Your perspective has. Our inner dialogue works much the same way. The stories we tell ourselves become the windows through which we view the world. Some stories empower us. Others quietly keep us standing still. Psychologists often describe this process as cognitive reframing, the ability to interpret familiar experiences through a healthier, more balanced perspective. It doesn't mean pretending everything is perfect. It means allowing room for possibilities that fear may have overlooked. Perhaps you've been carrying an old belief that your worth depends entirely on productivity, or that asking for help is a sign of weakness, or that every setback defines your future. If those thoughts have begun losing their grip, even slightly, that alone can feel like a meaningful shift. One man once described spending years believing he had to earn every moment of rest. If he wasn't working, he felt guilty. If he slowed down, he felt as though he was falling behind. Then one afternoon, while watching his daughter laugh in the backyard, a thought crossed his mind. What if being present is just as valuable as being productive? Nothing in his career changed that day. His paycheck stayed the same. His responsibilities remained. But something inside him softened. That single question gradually reshaped the way he lived. If this resonates with your own experience, pause for a moment and ask yourself, if I spoke to a close friend the way I sometimes speak to myself, how would they feel? It's a simple question, but for many people, the answer reveals just how much compassion they've forgotten to offer themselves. Growth doesn't always begin with changing your circumstances. Sometimes it begins with changing the narrator inside your own mind. And once that voice begins speaking with greater kindness, another transformation often follows. Because confidence isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives as quiet trust. And that's where the sixth sign begins. Sign 6, you feel more willing to trust the process, even without all the answers. There is a moment in every long journey when the destination disappears from view. The road bends. The map becomes less certain. You can no longer see what's waiting around the next corner. For some people, that uncertainty feels frightening. For others, it becomes an invitation. Many Capricorns are known for careful planning. They often appreciate structure, preparation, and knowing where they're headed. Those qualities can provide remarkable stability, but life has a way of reminding us that not every meaningful chapter begins with complete certainty. Sometimes, the most important opportunities arrive before we feel fully ready. Imagine hiking through a mountain trail wrapped in early morning fog. You can't see the entire path. You can only see the next few steps. Yet with each step forward, the trail gradually reveals itself. Life often unfolds in much the same way. Some people describe discovering that confidence didn't come before taking action. It grew because they took action. Not reckless action, thoughtful action, curious action. One conversation they had been postponing. One application they finally submitted. One creative idea they stopped hiding. One honest decision they had been avoiding. These moments rarely transform life overnight, but they often transform the person making them. There is an old image used by many storytellers. A sailor cannot control the wind, but the sailor can adjust the sails. Perhaps that's the deeper invitation hidden within this symbolic season. Not to control every outcome, but to respond thoughtfully to whatever life places before you. If this resonates with your experience, consider reflecting on this question. Where am I waiting for certainty when what I truly need is courage? There may not be an immediate answer, and that's perfectly okay. Reflection isn't about rushing toward conclusions. It's about creating space where wisdom has room to emerge. Many people eventually realize that trust isn't the absence of uncertainty. It's the willingness to continue despite it, like planting seeds without knowing exactly when they'll bloom, like beginning a meaningful conversation without knowing how it will end, like believing that growth is still happening even when progress feels invisible. The quiet confidence that develops through these moments isn't dramatic. It doesn't demand attention. It simply helps you meet life with a steadier heart. And perhaps that's one of the greatest changes of all. Because when your definition of success evolves, when you protect your energy, when solitude brings clarity, when relationships become more authentic, when your inner voice grows kinder, and when you learn to move forward without needing every answer, you begin becoming someone who sees the world differently. But there is one final sign. It quietly weaves all the others together. It isn't about what happens around you. It's about the meaning you begin finding within your own journey. And that final reflection is where this story reaches its most powerful moment. Sign 7. You begin seeing your life as a story still being written. There comes a moment in many people's lives when they stop asking only, "What happens next?" Instead, they begin asking a different question. Who am I becoming through all of this? It may seem like a subtle difference, but it changes everything. Many Capricorns may notice that as July begins, they're less interested in rushing toward the next milestone and more curious about the meaning behind the journey itself. Not because ambition has disappeared, but because perspective has expanded. Imagine opening a novel in the middle of the story. You read a chapter where the main character faces setbacks, uncertainty, and difficult decisions. Without the earlier chapters, or the ones still to come, it might seem like everything is falling apart. But the author knows something the reader does not. The story isn't finished. Our lives often feel the same way. When we're living through uncertainty, it's easy to mistake a single chapter for the entire book. A missed opportunity becomes proof that nothing will work out. A difficult conversation feels like the end of a relationship. A season of waiting feels endless, yet when people look back years later, they often discover those very moments became unexpected turning points. Not because fate guaranteed it, but because they grew through the experience. Growth has a remarkable way of changing the meaning of our memories. The obstacle that once felt unfair may later reveal an important lesson. The delay that once felt frustrating may have created space for a better decision. The unexpected detour may have introduced someone or something that reshaped the path ahead. That doesn't mean every hardship has a hidden purpose. Life is more complex than that. Some experiences simply hurt, some questions remain unanswered, and some chapters ask us to carry uncertainty longer than we'd like. But even then, many people discover that meaning isn't always found in the event itself. Sometimes it's found in the resilience that grows because of it. Picture an ancient oak tree standing on a windswept hillside. Its trunk twists in directions that seem unusual. Its branches don't grow in perfect symmetry. From a distance, Someone might assume it developed that way by accident, but every curve tells the story of years spent adapting to changing seasons. Strong winds didn't prevent it from growing. They shaped the way it grew. Perhaps our lives are not so different. The moments that challenged us may also have strengthened qualities we didn't know we possessed. Patience, compassion, humility, courage, wisdom. These are not achievements that appear on a resume, yet they often become the qualities people remember most. If this resonates with your experience, take a quiet moment to reflect on these questions. What chapter of my life am I living right now? Am I judging the entire story based on one difficult page? What strengths have quietly emerged that I rarely acknowledge? There may not be immediate answers, and that's okay. Reflection isn't about solving every mystery. It's about becoming more present within your own story. Perhaps that's one of the gifts symbolic astrology can offer. Not certainty, not guarantees, but a framework for asking meaningful questions, for noticing patterns, for becoming more aware of the ways we're changing, even when those changes are too gradual to see day by day. If July 2026 represents anything for many Capricorns, perhaps it is this gentle invitation to pause before rushing ahead, to notice the quiet shifts already taking place, to celebrate progress that isn't always visible, and to remember that becoming is often more important than arriving. Because life isn't measured only by the goals we accomplish, it's also measured by the person we're becoming along the way. Closing reflection. Tonight, we've explored 7 symbolic signs that many Capricorns may notice as July begins. Perhaps you recognized yourself in one. Perhaps several felt surprisingly familiar. Or perhaps none of them reflected your current experience, and that's perfectly valid too. Astrology doesn't have to be viewed as a fixed map of the future. For many people, it's a symbolic language that encourages reflection rather than certainty. It offers questions instead of guarantees, images instead of instructions, invitations instead of conclusions. Whether or not these themes resonate with you, taking time to reflect on your own experiences can be valuable in its own right. Every life unfolds differently. Every journey has its own rhythm, and every chapter deserves the patience to unfold before we decide what it means. As you move through the days ahead, pay attention to the moments that are easy to overlook, the conversation that stays with you, the quiet instinct you almost ignored, the unexpected sense of peace after making an honest decision, the realization that you've handled a challenge differently than you would have a year ago. These are the kinds of changes that rarely make headlines, yet they often become the foundation of lasting personal growth. Maybe the most meaningful transformation isn't becoming someone entirely new. Maybe it's gradually becoming more fully yourself, a little more honest, a little more present, a little more compassionate, and a little less afraid of the unknown. Because no matter where your journey leads next, one truth remains. Your story is still being written. Every sunrise offers another blank page. Every thoughtful choice adds another sentence. Every act of courage, no matter how small, becomes part of the legacy you're quietly creating. So don't rush to finish the chapter you're living today. Read it carefully. Live it fully. Allow it to teach you what only this season can teach. The next chapter will arrive in its own time. Until then, trust your ability to keep growing, keep learning, and keep discovering who you are becoming. If one or more of these signs resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy thoughtful astrology and personal growth content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next journey.